tale begins with Greg receiving a summons to the supervisor's office. The receptionist cautions that the supervisor has stepped out and asks Greg to wait. When the boss returns and announces Greg's termination, Greg appears oblivious. As the boss leans in to check on Greg, he abruptly rises and shoves the man. The boss topples, striking his head and perishing instantly. A startled Greg conceals the body behind a drape. The receptionist enters and assumes the boss hasn't arrived yet. Greg departs, pledging to return later. He heads to a nearby tavern and orders a drink. Suddenly, a woman at a nearby table begins to show interest in him. She deems him authentic and exhibits telekinetic abilities. She knows of Greg's deed because she is the architect of this realm and its unintended outcomes. She tasks Greg with retrieving her boyfriend's amber crystals from the restroom in exchange for absolving him of the murder charge. Greg locates the unconscious boyfriend in the restroom and retrieves an amulet adorned with amber crystals from his grasp. The woman claims these crystals can manipulate this fabricated reality. After completing her request, the woman grasps Greg's hands and elucidates that this world is merely light, refracted from human neurons, and is alterable. Meanwhile, the boss's body in the office begins to stir, extending its hand to unlatch the window before tumbling onto the street in view of office personnel. Greg rushes to the scene, and all eyes fall upon him. Emerging from the bar to evade suspicion, the woman guides Greg away, knowing he was not implicated. Despite Greg's desire to retrieve his wallet containing vital documents and money, the woman persuades him to abandon it. Instead, she urges him to sell his phone at a pawn shop for a meager sum. On television, news reports suggest the police are considering murder, but the woman assures Greg of his freedom. She invites him to stay with her in a tent city beneath a bridge, boasting electricity and a muted television. Greg learns from the news that the boss's demise is labeled an accident, granting him liberty. However, without a place to go, and having left his key and documents in the office, Greg finds solace in the woman's offer. She tutors him in manipulating the world with telekinesis, a skill he relishes, sharing his dream home sketches with her. To his surprise, she recognizes herself in the drawings, revealing they share a life in the real world as a couple. Meanwhile, Greg's daughter, Emily, seeks assistance from her brother, Arthur, in locating their father. Despite Emily's plea, Arthur remains hesitant to reconnect with a father consummate by work, neglecting his children. Meanwhile, Greg and Isabel arrive at a roller skating rink where they indulge in yellow crystals, enjoying themselves immensely. Isabel insists the people around them are mere illusions, prompting her to suggest toppling them over. Initially hesitant, Greg eventually joins in, using his telekinetic abilities to push people around, finding amusement in the chaos. Their antics continue until boredom sets in, prompting them to steal clothes and observe the arriving police before teleporting into a police car and heading to the station for more amusement. Eventually, growing tired of the game, they depart. Meanwhile, Emily scours nearby hotels in search of her father, but to no avail. Later, Isabel proposes grabbing a meal, leaving Greg to order alone as she steps away. While waiting, Greg witnesses Isabel halt a passing car, hop in, and drive off, leaving him behind. Unaware of his son's presence, Greg leaves the cafe without eating, only to be mistaken for a homeless person by the bartender, who serves him expired food. Upon Isabel's return, she suggests visiting Kendo, a crystal synthesizer near their location. As they part ways, Isabel enters the house, while Greg remains outside, where he encounters his daughter, Emily. Despite her disappointment at his absence during her graduation, Emily forgives him and offers a photo with her home phone number, hoping to reconnect. After Emily departs, Isabel returns and vehemently urges Greg to forget about his daughter, insisting she's merely a figment of his imagination. Their disagreement attracts the attention of a local troublemaker, prompting Greg to request a yellow crystal. Using his telekinetic abilities, he flips the hooligan's car. The next morning, Greg awakens in the tent camp, but Isabel is conspicuously absent. After a futile search, he stumbles upon Emily's photo with a phone number and decides to call from the nearest payphone. With no answer, Greg returns to find Isabel frustrated, fearing she had lost him to the illusion of his daughter's existence. Despite her claims that Emily isn't real, Greg remains skeptical without further proof. Isabel then reveals special blue crystals, explaining that each of them must consume 10, though there are only 16 in total. Calming both herself and Greg, she loads the crystals into a device and hands it to him, signaling it's time to depart the simulation. Greg inhales deeply and finds himself in a room filled with people seated in chairs. Connected to a single computer via breathing tubes, an assistant addresses Isabel as Dr. Clemens and inquires about her well-being. Isabel expresses frustration that Greg took the simulated personality too seriously, prompting their exit from the simulation. She expresses gratitude to Kendo for helping them find the blue crystals. Isabel points out a man in the simulation whom she met there, and asks for Dr. Whitler to be disconnected. The man approaches Greg, who begins questioning him and discovers that even Emily is an imitation. Stepping outside, Greg is awestruck by the beauty of the surroundings, filled with beautiful people and strange, translucent figures Isabel refers to as telepresences. These are people transmitting their images remotely, experiencing interaction from home. Isabel leads Greg to the waterfront, where he marvels at the scenery and wonders why he has no recollection of it. Isabel reassures him that memory loss is common and will soon be restored. She shows him their home, and Greg realizes he had always been drawing the real world. Meanwhile, Emily continues her search for her father in the simulated world, while Greg enjoys the comfort of his real home and wife. In the evening, Isabel admits her irresponsibility in exiting the simulation without enough returning crystals, causing Greg's memory loss. She explains how automation, synthetic biology, and asteroid mining transformed the once terrible real world, providing financial prosperity and freedom for its inhabitants. Isabel showcases Greg's invention, a thought visualizer, which draws whatever a person thinks about. With Greg's help, Isabel illustrates how synthetic biology and asteroid mining solved ecological problems and brought financial prosperity to the world. People now have the freedom and time to pursue their interests, and Earth has become safe and prosperous. However, people easily become accustomed to a good life, prompting Isabel to invent the brain box to foster gratitude for achievements. Greg pleads with his wife to stay for one more day, during which they enjoy swimming in the sea and relaxing on a yacht. In the city, a concerned scientist approaches Greg and asks him to keep an eye on Isabel's research. The next morning, Isabel asks Greg to return to the brain box for further research, but he opposes, arguing that she already has enough data and he doesn't want to revisit that world. Instead, he agrees to give her a public interview. In the evening, a brain box presentation is organized, and the host discusses Isabel's idea of simulating different worlds for comparison. Isabelle calls Greg to the stage to compare his responses before and after visiting the brain box world. It becomes evident that Greg was previously a grumpy, cynic, dissatisfied with everything, but now he is content with life. However, during the interview, he sees Emily in the audience and freezes. She disappears, and Greg thanks Isabel. Later, a crowd forms around Isabel, eager to speak with the genius. Meanwhile, Greg sees the translucent image of Emily again and runs after her. She reminds him of his daughter and son who love him. Greg insists that Emily is not real, but his daughter recalls sweet memories from her childhood, urging him to choose which world he wants to stay in. Meanwhile, a commotion begins below, with Isabel caught in the center. Sensing something wrong, she calls for Greg, and Emily disappears. Taking a yellow crystal, Greg parts the crowd with a wave of his hands, shocking Isabel, as these powers shouldn't work in the real world. Nonetheless, a real commotion ensues, intertwining realities of different worlds. The couple rushes to the laboratory, realizing that by taking an incomplete dose of blue crystals, they brought part of the simulation into reality. They need to fix this urgently, but the blue crystals are only available in the simulation. Isabel urges Greg to find Kendo and leads him to a bar across from his former office. To his surprise, he sees his former colleagues and the boss who fell from the window alive. Demanding answers, Greg is reminded by Isabel that everything around them is a fabricated world. The couple robs a man for his car and money, driving to Kendo's laboratory to find a solution. Kendo agrees to provide them with the crystals, but his suspicious movement prompts Isabel to shoot him. However, they find that Kendo had no weapon, yet Isabel is confident he's fine in the real world. They discover a packet of blue crystals on his body, and the couple flees as the police storm the building. With Emily informed about her father's sighting, she and her brother head to the tent camp. The police surround the camp, demanding the criminals come out. Isabel counts the crystals, finding disastrously few left. Only one can return home. Charging a special device, she gives it to Greg. He suggests sacrificing himself to return to reality, but Isabel isn't sure it will work. Overwhelmed with helplessness, she cries as she created all this. However, Greg realizes that this world isn't so bad either, as he has children here. At that moment, Emily runs onto the bridge, shouting down to her father, begging him to surrender and stay alive. Greg decides to stay, and Isabel steps out to the center, distracting the police while ensuring Greg sneaks past the camp's perimeter. She takes the crystals, and the man flees, utilizing the loud signals of passing cars. He heads to a rehabilitation clinic, where people like him with difficulties are accepted. There, he tells them about a girl who calls him father, and he believes her. Sometime later, Greg arrives at a park where Emily is sitting on a bench. She is glad that her father overcame his addiction and admits that she loves him. This is where the film ends. People often try to escape from their problems, which weigh heavily on them. They often imagine another life where happiness and peace reign. But one should not forget that every person independently creates their inner world. And which of them is real can only be decided by that person.